Welcome to meeting number 44 of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. Testing. English channel, testing. Testing. English channel, testing.
Sorry. Just...
English channel, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Est-ce que ça va? Oui.
Can you hear me now? Are you hearing me now? So, once again, welcome to meeting number 44 of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, October 16th. We are beginning our study today. Yes, madam?
Produire les témoins, si vous permettez. OK.
Today we are starting a study on sexual harassment in federally regulated workplaces. And we have the Treasury Board Secretariat appearing before us. Thank you for accepting our invitation. We have Mr. Ross McLeod, Assistant Deputy Minister, Governance, Planning and Policy Sector, and Ms. Martine Glandon, Manager, Values and Ethics. So welcome here this morning. Ms. Ashton would like to have a chance to say a few words. Thank you very much. At the beginning of this study, I would like to begin the meeting by moving a motion better to clarify the focus of this study as regards sexual harassment and also the role which should be played by the status of women with respect to this study. We have carried out research, of course, to make sure that the motion is admissible.
The Status of Women has committed to taking on a study of sexual harassment in the federal workplace, whereas it is the mandate of the committee to guide Status of Women Canada, where it is the legal mandate of Status of Women Canada to coordinate policy with respect to status of women and administer related programs. Be it resolved that given the severity of allegations of sexual harassment within the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that the Standing Committee on the Status of Women call upon Status of Women Canada to take the lead in coordinating policy with respect to sexual harassment within all federal departments, including the RCMP. And the reason why we're putting this forward, and as I mentioned, we did research to ensure that this motion was permissible, is because we really want to make sure that the work we're doing here day in and day out is useful, that we're not just studying something for the sake of studying, but that we're also giving some guidance to Status of Women Canada as to the serious issue of sexual harassment, not just in the RCMP, but across the federal public service. We know that today we have the Treasury Board in front of us. This isn't a case of taking over the work of Treasury Board, but it's a case of recognizing that the status of women has a role to play. And also, it's also very important to clarify and recognize that Status of Women Canada, in its own mandate, it states that it has the capacity to coordinate policy with respect to status of women and administer related programs. It can work with other departments, and that's an issue that's raised some question in the past. But I think it's critical that we look to the mandate and take that mandate as really the scope of the department, and therefore the kind of role we can play. And so we as members of the opposition would like to see that we're all coming here to give some guidance, that the testimony of witnesses such as those here today, but others that will be joining us over the next several weeks, that we can use that testimony to be able to contribute to shaping policy. And that's what undoubtedly women who are facing sexual harassment want to see. They don't want to see more studies. They want to see action come from these studies. And I think we as committee members have a duty to make sure that the work that we're doing here, using parliamentary resources, actually amounts to something, and that the witnesses we're inviting here, that we're taking their feedback seriously, and that we're taking that to the next level and directing some kind of action, and that we're directing Status of Women to follow its mandate, which is to work with other departments. And if I could note, I mean, I'm very excited to examine the new policy put forward by Treasury Board, but I also realize that one of the policies that's been put forward by the government most recently is C-42 with respect to the RCMP, and having had the chance to be part of the Public Safety Committee in the last couple of weeks, it's quite clear that there still is work remains when it comes to defining a sexual harassment policy, and we figure what better department to do that than Status of Women Canada? What better department to take on a leading role for women in the public service and in the federal workplace than Status of Women Canada? And again, we're not just focusing on the RCMP, but we recognize that some of the most serious allegations have come from the RCMP. But we note that leadership is required there as well as in the broader federal civil service. And so we certainly hope that members around this table will support this motion, will support the need for our committee to give guidance, and will support the Status of Women Canada mandate to work with others to provide leadership and take the leading role, a role that we can all be proud of shaping policy when it comes to something as serious as sexual harassment in federal departments, including the RCMP. So, Madam Chair, this is meant to provide a scope, to provide us a goal, a noble goal that we can work toward in this committee, and certainly put the testimonies that we get to best use, the research that we receive to best use, and to truly be able to provide leadership for women and frankly all people that work in the federal civil service, and in federal departments, including the RCMP. So with that, I would like to put forward the motion, and I'd be happy to see any further discussion and certainly reflection on the importance of defining exactly what we're doing here.
Madame Toupé. Donc, on va...
Well.
Okay. Donc,
Ms. Toupé moves that the committee go in camera in order to vote on this motion. Those in favor of going into camera, please raise your hands. Those opposed, please raise your hands. Ms. Toupé's motion is accepted, so our apologies, but we have to suspend our sitting for a few minutes.
que tout le monde a l'air...
So we will resume our sitting now. So welcome once again. We apologize. Sometimes we have these interruptions. So I would like to welcome the Treasury Board here today, represented by Ross McLeod, Assistant Deputy Minister, Governance Planning and Policy Sector, as well as Ms. Martine Glandon, Manager Values and Ethics. The clerk told me that if we do not have enough time with the Treasury Board today, there are other open dates on our agenda, and perhaps there would be the possibility of a further follow-up if necessary. So I will hand the floor over to you. You have 10 minutes, and then there will be a question period, which will be a bit shorter than usual. So now you have the floor, 10 minutes.
Chair, we're very pleased to be here today to help the committee with this important study. Harassment in the workplace is unacceptable and will not be tolerated regardless of its source. We know that it's important for the federal public service to maintain a productive, healthy, and respectful workplace where positive working relationships and practices are promoted. Indeed, the core values and ethics of the public sector explicitly include treating each other with respect and fairness. Unfortunately, we know that harassment does still occur, and we have taken steps to prevent and respond to these situations by developing a policy on harassment, prevention, and resolution, a directive on the harassment complaint process, several guides for departments, and by delivering awareness, information sessions, and training programs. We also offer formal and informal mechanisms to raise issues related to harassment. Success in the practice of these values will foster a safe and healthy workplace free from harassment. When allowed to persist, harassment has adverse effects on the mental health and engagement of employees and on the quality of their work. In a complex and demanding work environment that brings together diverse people and in which collaboration is essential to success, misunderstandings and interpersonal conflicts are inevitable. The organizational culture influences how colleagues interact with one another and must therefore promote awareness of practices such as good communication and effective interpersonal skills. The ongoing effort to demonstrate respect is everyone's personal responsibility. La loi canadienne sur les droits de la personne prévoit que tout individu.
The Canadian Human Rights Act provides that every person in the workplace has a right to freedom from harassment based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, disability, and conviction for which a pardon has been granted. These are referred to as prohibited grounds of discrimination. In addition, the Act deems that sexual harassment to be harassment on a prohibited ground. The Canadian government has been a leader on policies dealing with harassment in the workplace, being the first employer to introduce a formal policy in 1982. Since 1982, the policy has been revised 3 times. On October 1st, 2012, a renewed policy and a new directive was introduced. The new policy instruments give deputy heads the flexibility to tailor harassment prevention and resolution mechanisms and practices to their operational needs, emphasize the need for organizations to restore the workplace following an allegation of harassment, encourage greater use of informal resolution processes, and put greater emphasis on the need for organizations to undertake preventive activities and achieve results in a manner that is both respectful to employees and supportive of a more collaborative approach between deputy heads, employees, and bargaining agents on harassment prevention and resolution. The renewed policy and directive continue to reflect the responsibility of deputy heads for establishing and maintaining a respectful and harassment-free workplace, for promptly resolving related complaints, and for monitoring compliance within their organizations. Harassment prevention is tied to one of the public sector values, respect for people. The new Values and Ethics Code for the public sector, which is a condition of employment was introduced in April 2012 and provides an opportunity for managers to reinforce the value of respectful relationships. The Treasury Board Secretariat, through the development of its communication tools and dialogues with organizations, encourages a systemic approach which education and incents respectful behavior for all employees. In addition to providing awareness training on harassment, the new code presents an opportunity for promotion of respect and development of related skills, empathic listening, difficult conversations, emotional intelligence for all employees and especially managers.
Administration. The policy on harassment prevention and resolution includes sexual harassment as part of its definition of harassment. Federal public servants have several mechanisms for making an allegation of sexual harassment. Formal mechanisms include filing a complaint of harassment in accordance with the policy on harassment, prevention, and resolution, filing a grievance, filing a complaint with the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Informal mechanisms include discussions with an informal conflict resolution practitioner or with an employee assistance program counselor. Through the Treasury Board's Secretariat website, several guides and tools are available to public servants, i.e. managers, employees, and persons responsible for the harassment complaint process in the field of harassment. Several courses are available through the Joint Learning Program and through the Canada School of Public Service. In addition, the Treasury Board policy on harassment prevention and resolution, some departments have developed their own internal policies, tools, and are offering awareness sessions and training programs on harassment, so they're actually going further than the requirements of the policy. I'll talk briefly about harassment statistics. In the 2011 Public Service Employee Survey, data regarding harassment indicate that public servants continue to signal a high incidence of perceived harassment. 29% of the 201,430 respondents believe that they have experienced harassment of all kinds in a federal workplace within the last 2 years. The actual number of formally filed cases compared to the total number of federal government employees is relatively small. The survey results do not differentiate between sexual harassment and harassment of a personal nature. The Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat collected limited statistics on harassment of all kinds through the Management Accountability Exercise in 2009-10. The 40 largest departments and agencies that participated reported a total of 314 harassment complaints and or grievances between the period of November 2009 and October 2010. Of the 314 cases, 77 were determined to be founded by the delegated managers of these organizations. The numbers provided through the MAF included harassment grievances and harassment complaints, which follow two different processes. Again, the results do not differentiate between sexual harassment and harassment of a general nature. Thank you for your attention. We will now be pleased to take your questions.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. So we will now move on to question period. Starting on the government side, Madame Troupe, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here, and I'm sorry for the interruption earlier. We really wanted to have a full hour with you, so we may have to call you back if we have more questions. And we feel that it's very important that all public servants be free to face the daily and expected challenges of a day's work without harassment or fear of being mistreated by coworkers or managers or superiors. One of the questions I have is, in regard to the training of a manager, who determines what training a manager receives for dealing with sexual harassment complaints? And like, I'm sure there's specific guidelines, but how are they trained?
The duty to prevent harassment rests with deputy ministers or deputy heads of departments. So at a departmental level, it's they who would determine who actually gets trained and how.
Okay, so in whatever department, so in a specific department, there's new employees coming. Is there one specific person that is looking after making sure that they're informed, or how are they informed that there is such a policy in place?
Typically, there's a senior official in a department who's responsible for harassment complaints. They frequently have, but not always, have the role of informing people in a kind of champion format in their department. Also, other players such as the heads of HR may have that responsibility as well, and typically they would do that through departmental communications as they would with other HR personnel issues.
Now, are there specific guidelines with respect to the timeliness of responses to allegations? Like, so, for example, if somebody reports an allegation of sexual harassment, what's the procedure? Like, how long does something take? Like an investigation?
Under the new policy, I'm going to ask my colleague, Madame Glandon, to comment on that. There's a 5-step process that's been outlined in the directive, and we do note that in the previous policy, complaint resolution took a very long time, and one of the things we're wanting to do with the new policy is actually to provide a more timely process, because when these complaints are unresolved, they do become a serious workplace problem for everyone, in particular the person who has been harassed. Martine, peux-tu ajouter un commentaire?
The new directive says that normally within 12 months. So from the all the steps, there's 5 steps that is proposed,
right.
And we're saying within 12 months generally. But we know sometimes takes longer, sometimes takes not as long.
So what is the process for ensuring that, I guess, accountability is taking place? So someone makes a report on a sexual harassment, and then it may or may not be looked into. Like, is there sort of a watchdog for the managers that are responsible for that? Like, how are we ensuring that everything is looked at and investigated? Is there a procedure, is something logged?
It's the deputy minister's responsibility to ensure that those systems are in place. One challenge with having a policy like this that cuts across the whole federal government is the diversity of organizations that are there. So the new policies have allowed some flexibility in designing systems that actually fit the operational needs of different organizations. As Martine mentioned, we have a time frame, an advised time frame that should be followed. At the same time, there is the 5-step process in the new directive. It is up to deputy ministers to ensure that they comply and to ensure that they are managing the information flow that goes with that. At a higher level, the government Treasury Board Secretariat has the responsibility to monitor departmental performance on a number of fronts, and that's actually one of our responsibilities as outlined in the policy.
Okay. Are employees involved in the development of the policy, or how does the new policy that you have in October 2012? What's the biggest difference between the new one and the previous one? And are employees involved in the process at all?
I'll take the process point first,
Sure.
if that's agreeable
Sure.
to the committee. We went through a very long, multi-month process with bargaining agents on that, who are, of course, the legal representatives of the employees. So we did spend several months working with them and consulting on the policy. This was a consultation exercise, not a negotiation, but we did take full and fair account of the comments that were provided to us by the bargaining agents. In terms of sorry, can you remind me of the other half of your question? I'm sorry.
Trying to remember where I was. It was in regard to were they involved in the policy, is what you answered.
Yes, that's correct.
When a new employee starts,
Yes.
And you had indicated how they, sort of what the process is for them to know that there's a policy in place, how do they know what is acceptable and not acceptable? Like, is it a sheet of paper that they're given, or is it something that's verbally explained to them so they know what they should complain about or not complain about if there is an issue?
Right. That is outlined in the policy, and different departments will handle that different ways depending on their operational environment. There is no shortage of information available to employees, though, in terms of guides and the policy and so on. For instance, when we Treasury Board approved this new policy. There were emails and communications sent out to deputy heads, heads of human resources, and so on, and these were sent out throughout departments and organizations around the federal government.
Okay.
I think in the end, no one should be able to claim that they didn't know this.
Right.
Those materials are amply available, and I'll just add that the School of Public Services offers multiple courses on prevention of harassment, so there's no shortage of tools available for people if they want to use them.
Am I still, okay?
30 seconds.
Yep. So when you just said they offer courses, are these online courses, or is this a seminar-type course that makes them aware of what is going on?
The school offers a number of kinds of different courses. Martin, could you explain this?
It's mostly the courses offered by the Canada School of Public Service are mostly classroom set,
good.
but department may have some online courses as well, so it varies from department to
Up to the department.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Merci. On passe maintenant du côté de l'opposition.
Now we go to the opposition side. Ms. Ashton.
Morning. I'm sure you understand that it's important that we know where we're going when we're here, and that was it's an ongoing effort to do so. Mr. McLeod, you brought up an interesting point around the 29% of people speaking of perceived harassment in the workplace. Do you know how much of that is sexual harassment?
The question wasn't based by type of harassment. As you're aware, there are several kinds of harassment, and it wasn't broken out by that. We had a very limited number of questions we were able to ask in the survey, and we left it at just one harassment question. However, before answering the question, employees were presented with the definition of harassment in the policy, so they read it and they clearly understood what they were responding to.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it would be useful to have a question on sexual harassment?
We were quite disappointed with the results of the survey this year with respect to that. This has been a persistent result in previous public service surveys as well, and we are designing the 2014 survey now, and it's certainly a question we'll be looking at because it was, overall, the results of the survey were very good. However, there were a couple of areas, this one in particular, that was disturbing, and we do want to have a look at that in a little more depth because it's, in contrast to what we know about reported cases, if more than a quarter of the public service is identifying that they have they feel that they have been harassed, then there's a disconnect there, and we need to get to the root of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm certainly glad to hear that there's intention to bring that in 2014, especially because it's such a serious and often very difficult kind of harassment to come forward with. Did this survey or maybe the work that you do, is there any indication as to why people refrain? I mean, 314 complaints is certainly not representative anywhere near of 29%. Do you have any idea why people don't come forward with such allegations?
Yes. We're not totally sure. However, we had another question in the survey about employees feeling free to initiate complaint processes, informal processes. 40% of our employees said that they were reluctant to do so. And so we think there's a connection between the two. And again, that's something we need to drill down on a little more the next time around because I'm worried that if the processes are there to help people and they're not using them, then it's hard to get at it. Of course, what we want to do and the objective of the policy is prevention. It's better when it doesn't happen at all, but when it does, people should feel free to use the processes that are there.
Mm-hmm. So we're aware, of course, of the policy that just came out recently, just a few days ago, I guess, and we've done some work to look at understanding what the difference is between the 2001 and 2012 policy. One of the points that is different is the 2001 policy mandates compliance, and I think the quote is departments or organizations must meet the requirements of this policy. The 2012 policy doesn't contain such a statement. It does state that the Treasury Board will monitor results, but it is certainly a point of concern that emphasis on the word must and the overt emphasis on compliance is not there. How is this policy better, especially when that kind of a statement is or that kind of directive isn't there?
There's a number of advantages of the new policy. One is that the old policy was a bit rigid in terms of how it could be applied in different organizational contexts. So you can imagine a small policy department would have a different operational environment than a large operational one, for example. So we provided some flexibility there so people could actually target the issue a little more effectively. In terms of compliance, which is the part of the other question that I neglected to answer earlier, the Treasury Board framework on compliance actually applies to all departments in Treasury Board with respect to Treasury Board policies, and there are a number of measures we can take against departments if they don't comply. The change of wording that you referred to is actually part of a broader Treasury Board Secretariat approach to policy renewal in general. Deputy heads are very aware of their responsibilities under the various policies, and the compliance framework applies to all of them. And we have a number of sanctions which we can use against departments if they're not complying with the policies of the board in general, including this one.
So could you give us an example? I mean, you spoke around the need to be more flexible in terms of operational needs. So how does that work? Would it be possible to give us an example in terms of, whether it's, a workplace here in Ottawa versus, a smaller federally, a smaller federal department workplace, I guess, associated workplace outside of the national capital? I mean, what do you mean by being flexible in terms of operational needs?
If you consider, say, a white-collar environment like a policy department, you would expect that the interventions, the understanding of these issues to be a bit more sophisticated among the employees and managers, and that you would expect a different kind of comportment there. In an organization where you're dealing with frequent conflict, at a border, in a penal institution, you could see different situations arising where people would be put in a situation where they could be harassed. I'll point out, too, that harassment doesn't always come from a supervisor. It can come from a client. It can come from a colleague. It can come from someone who works for you as well. And you can imagine the various types of work environment that the federal government has where you could see different circumstances arising. So it does. And I think the important thing there is that now deputies have an opportunity to get into the specific situations that they're managing and actually do something about it. And unfortunately, the previous policy didn't really allow that. It wasn't flexible enough for them to do it.
How much time do I have?
45 seconds.
So I think you bring up an interesting point in terms of different workplaces, and with respect to the RCMP, for example, the Commissioner himself has talked about a culture that needs to change, and given the fact that it is a high-pressure workplace that is different from others, would you agree that in some of these workplaces the need to address that overall culture rather than a specific incidence of sexual harassment is needed, and something that perhaps Treasury Board could play a role in doing?
From our perspective, culture is key. And we think that culture underlies respect for people. Lack of respect underlies harassment. And if you change the culture and create a respectful work environment, then we'll see change. That's very much the theme that we're pursuing in dealing with departments on this.
Great, thank you.
Merci. On repasse maintenant de...
Thank you. Now we'll go back to Madam O'Neill Gordon. You have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to welcome the witnesses. I too feel badly that we were cut short, but I certainly enjoyed your presentation in the beginning, and I know you have a lot to offer or to tell us about the policy and the process of harassment in the workplace. And it is a very key and important conversation and topic in our study. It was great to hear you note that our Canadian government has been a leader on policies dealing with harassment in the workplace, and it is something that we as parliamentarians and all Canadians need to be educated on and to know that we are going in the right direction. We also mentioned disciplinary measures, and I wondered, we had asked this before, does the Treasury Board keep statistics of harassment complaints? I know it's an important issue. And how do you go about keeping the statistics and such?
It's actually very difficult to keep these statistics because of the state of our HR systems at the moment. We had kept detailed statistics in the past. However, as information paperwork burden reduction in the past, these statistics collection had been eliminated. We did, in the context of the 2009-10 MAF, ask departments to report in on how that was done. And also, as I mentioned in the 2011 survey, we did ask employees directly. What was interesting about the survey results that it was unfiltered material that we got back from the employees on it. So, 29% sounds very high to me if you look at the data, but it's an important indication that something's wrong in any case. And I think in the end, if you're looking for a respectful work environment, employees do have to understand that they should be free of harassment, and that indication to us is a worry.
That is so true. In the workplace, it is very important that you're free of that, because you're going to be you're going to do better work. You're going to complete what you have to do and be more beneficial to the company or to the departments. You mentioned earlier that employees are involved in developing policies. Could you elaborate on that a little bit further, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. We, in developing the new policy and directive, we consulted with a committee of the bargaining agents, and the bargaining agents or unions are the legal representatives of employees. Okay. So we worked through them in a committee for several months, actually, to create a harassment or prevention of harassment policy that would be suitable. And again, it wasn't a negotiated policy. It was one we consulted on, but we did give them full and fair airing of their views and took account of them.
So the unions have
Yes.
input in that as well.
Yes.
Now, we talked about disciplinary measures, and so who determines the disciplinary measures when they are warranted?
That would be departmental management, and the most senior departmental management, of course, is the deputy head, so they would do it. I should mention, too, that discipline can take a number of forms, right up to and including dismissal.
Okay. And does this change depending on what route a complaint takes? So it would depend on the complaint, I imagine, as to what change it takes.
Yeah, in the government we use a term called graduated discipline, which means that the disciplinary action has to be suitable to the actual nature of the issue itself. So, and again, it can go from a reprimand to, demotion to dismissal in the end if the incident is serious enough.
Yeah, depending on
Correct.
how serious it really is. That's all. Okay, Terry, you have a question?
Thank you. You've got 29% of the federal employees that responded who feel they've been harassed, but in 11 categories of harassment. Okay, so you list them on the other side. That includes race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, age, sex, sexual orientation, marital status, family status, disability, and conviction for which a pardon has been granted. So you had 314 complaints in all those categories, but you don't know if any of them were sexual harassment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you really don't know if I mean, I think your track record is probably much better than you think it is, because you really don't know if there are any complaints for sexual harassment.
Yeah, it's what the data has given us so far, and it depends on how you collect it, of course. I hesitate to comment on how we're doing in terms, because in any case one issue is too many.
Of course, but what I'm saying is there's not enough information here to know, and of the 77 founded complaints, you don't know how many were sexual harassment. No. I'd like to drill down to what these words in the Values and Ethics Code actually mean, what happens on the front line. For instance, it says, an employee can bring the matter in confidence and without fear of reprisal to the attention of immediate supervisor. So say a female clerk is being harassed by her immediate supervisor. So she wouldn't take it to him.
Correct.
She would take it to a senior officer or the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner. Now, you're saying you take 12 months on average to resolve this. Do you make the effort to move that employee to another job in the meanwhile? I mean, that's an awfully long time to be working in a tough situation.
Yeah, it is a requirement of the policy that deputy heads maintain a healthy workplace, and frequently it is the case that you just remove an individual from danger.
So frequently, or that's part of the policy?
That's what you should do. I mean,
is that step one?
I'll ask Martine to speak to the details, but the idea is to protect the individual first, and then you sort out the details of the issue through a normal process. But the important thing is to protect the individual who is being harassed immediately. Martine, did you comment?
Maybe I should add that there's different process as well. The process you're talking about, it's more on the disclosure of wrongdoing as well. So that's another process. The process for harassment as well is something else. One of the one of the first steps that a manager would do, or the delegated manager would do, it's to see the need of both parties, okay, and see if there is a need to remove one or the two, or...
So is that like a mediation that begins, or does the manager go to each employee separately? And
It depends. It depends on what happens. If they decide to go to informal conflict resolution road, they can do that as well. It depends on the seriousness of the situation and the incident, really.
Merci beaucoup. Donc, on passe maintenant.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Scrow has 7 minutes.
Thank you so much for coming and helping us. The reason that we're doing this study, of course, as you know, is as a result of the complaints and the issues raised with many of the women in the RCMP. That's the reason we're actually looking at this. So I appreciate the fact that you've reviewed already your mandate and your policy and are making changes. But further to that, something that gives us great concern is these numbers that we're talking about. The fact that you've done that survey of over 200,000 people, and a third of them speak of harassment in different categories gathered, but the very issue of sexual harassment is the one that we're very focused on. So I guess one of the suggestions, would it be possible for you to go back and do a survey and be more specific, because it is important for us to know, and it's a difficult issue for people to complain about. In talking to many of the women in the RCMP, for them to go forward and lodge a complaint, they're dealing with all of their superiors, and that doesn't change in any of our departments here. So for people to go forward and lodge any of these complaints, even you said there was a small amount that actually came forward, well, granted, but I would suspect that they were very concerned about their jobs. So people do not come forward lightly. And have you given consideration to possibly in quite soon going forward and trying to do another survey very basically on this whole issue without it being too complex, to try to narrow it down during the same time that we're trying to do this study?
I think the time frame on that will actually be difficult. Surveying the public service is a large undertaking. So we're currently on a 3-year cycle to actually do that survey. However, I would also add that relative to the first part of your question, this policy and the Values and Ethics Code provide for an alternative route for complainants, so that you don't always have to deal with your direct supervisor in dealing with it, because frequently it can come, but not always from a supervisor. So in every case with the Public Service Disclosure Protection Act, there is an alternate route for people to go so that they can do it safely. What remains is the puzzle that we've had with those employees who feel that they can't initiate a process, which is still, in our view, too high. We're scheduling a survey for 2014, which is unfortunately a couple of years from now. But with respect to budgets and the ability to organize ourselves for a survey, we think that's the earliest we'll be able to do it. However, as I indicated on an earlier question, this is an area that we will be looking into for possible additional questions.
The whole issue of bullying and intimidation is a big issue in a variety of departments, and I've heard from some of these people, not only in the RCMP, that are not going to risk their jobs coming forward. When you're saying you're setting up a timeline of 12 months, it would seem to me, unless it was very severe, that's too long a period of time to have this hanging over, whether it's the deputy minister or whoever, or that employee. Why did you allow so much time to deal with this issue, and why do you not set tighter timelines so that often these things can be dealt with in a much shorter period of time? But if someone has 12 months, I'm sure it's going to be shuffled from one desk to another, and I'll get to that later, and so on. In the meantime, you've got 2 individuals, I suggest, maybe more, that have this hanging over their head.
We encourage speedy resolution. Sometimes the issues are very complex around harassment, and at some point, for due process, they do need to have some time to resolve them. A speedy resolution on some of these things is informal conflict resolution, where it can be dealt with quickly. In the event, for example, that it's based on a misunderstanding rather than intended harassment. And there are a number of methods to actually get there faster. We did feel we needed to leave enough time for due process to occur when there's a more serious case for both individuals involved, because even when someone has been accused of harassment, they do have the right to a due and fair process to ensure that it's occurred.
Well, the whole goal here is fairness for everyone. But the employees have a particular issue, much more difficult for them. The issue, what about the area of managers that aren't covered under your basic policies?
All managers in the core public administration are covered by this policy.
And the deputy ministers?
Deputy ministers, yes.
Would be covered under the same policy that you're putting forward now.
Yep.
What was the impetus for actually sitting down and reviewing the policy?
We are undergoing a large policy review all throughout the Treasury Board policy suite. It's been underway for about 5 years now. The idea being to modernize the policies and ensure that they're in keeping with deputy head responsibilities. In 2009, the government decided to rework the responsibilities of deputy ministers on human resources relative to the responsibilities of the center, that's the Treasury Board in general. And in order to ensure that they had the full responsibility they were supposed to do, we did review this policy. The old policy was also inflexible to specific work environments, and we thought it would be useful to do that so that actually deputies can target the specific issues of their work environment, which the old policy was not, frankly, the best at.
And have you had discussions with the unions and the human rights and so on and so forth in developing your new policy?
We consulted widely on this and had a multi-month consultative process with bargaining agents on it as well. And we consulted around the federal government, heads of HR, the Human Rights Commission, and so on.
And the issue of changing the culture of a particular organization or a department, how frequently do you have the kind of sessions where you encourage that openness and understanding of their employees in order to ensure that the employees are working? I mean, words are all wonderful, and
yes.
They read really beautifully, and it sounds great. But words are words. It doesn't necessarily just change it. Even though the intention is, it's very difficult to change the culture of any organization just by putting it on a piece of paper. It's really a mindset that has to change.
That's absolutely correct. And culture change is at the core of this. And it really is, pushing culture change down to the level of every single employee, because it can come from anywhere, or even clients in that respect. You have dual responsibilities in this. There's the responsibility of the deputy head to provide a safe work environment for employees, but there's also the responsibility of every individual who works in the government to make sure that they comply and that they're part of this culture where we actually prevent it. And one of the things we're trying to promote with the new policy in our work with heads of HR and practitioners of anti-harassment is that we're trying to ensure that they actually work to prevent rather than work to deal with it after the situation has happened.
Je vais devoir vous arrêter.
I'm afraid I have to stop you here. This ends our meeting of Treasury Board for this morning. I would like to thank you very much for being with us, for your indulgence. And I was discussing with the clerk and the committee. We have time free on the 25th of October, so perhaps if you were free, because I think that the committee would like to go a little further in its questioning. So thank you very much. I will suspend the sitting for a few minutes to enable the next group of witnesses to take their place. would ask you to take your places. We are going to start our meeting again.
Alors, bonjour.
Good morning. Oh, excuse me.
Alors, bonjour.
Good morning. I would like to welcome our witnesses here from the Canadian Human Rights Commission, represented by Mr. David Lancre and Ms. Monette Maillet and Mr. Philippe Dufresne. Welcome to you all. And we also have the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, represented by Sushil Gupta. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. So I would like to welcome you here to our committee, the Standing Committee on the Status of Women, as part of our study on sexual harassment. So each organization will have 10 minutes to speak, and then there will be a period of questions, a question period for members. So I would ask Mr. Langtree to begin. You have 10 minutes.
Honorable members, je vous remercie d'avoir invité la Commission.
Would like to thank you for inviting the Canadian Human Rights Commission to contribute to your study on sexual harassment in Canada's federally regulated workplaces. I have 3 main points.
All the work that has been done to eliminate it, sexual harassment persists. Second, that while organizations need to be proactive about it, policies alone are not good enough. And finally, that ending harassment depends on cultural change. Complaints of sexual harassment are more prevalent in hierarchical, male-dominated organizations. An equitable distribution of power within the workplace helps foster the inclusion of women and a workplace culture of respect. Il faut préciser que nous faisons partie de la
And finally, we see that harassment, the fight against harassment is only within our lifetime that Canada has made strides to stamp out sexual harassment in the workplace.
When she got her first job driving a gravel truck in Stony Mountain, Manitoba. Like many children who lived through the Great Depression, she worked out of necessity to support her family. Women joining the labor force at that time were routinely subjected to abuse, and there was little that they could do about it. Inappropriate comments and jokes, unwanted touching, and uninvited sexual overtures were a condition of work, part of the price you paid for being a female. It was just part of the job. They often just had to put up with it. It was a matter of survival. Today, every person has the right to live and work free from sexual harassment. This right is protected by the Canadian Human Rights Act, by provincial and territorial human rights laws, and by the Canada Labour Code. Toutes ces lois donnent des recours.
All provide recourse to victims of sexual harassment. Today, you can do something about it, but one should not have to do so.
Has occurred, the damage has been done. Humiliation, stigma, embarrassment, fear and stress cause emotional pain and suffering. We know emotional suffering to be akin to physical illness in the way it affects an individual. It goes without saying that organizations and society as a whole pay a heavy price in lost productivity. It's a far, far better thing to prevent harassment from occurring. Parliament designed the Canadian Human Rights Act as a tool to fight discrimination. The intent of Parliament was to provide equality of opportunity to everyone in Canada. The Canadian Human Rights Commission is responsible for administering the Act and promoting equality. We receive discrimination complaints regarding employment and services provided by organizations under federal jurisdiction. This includes the federal public sector, as well as private sector companies involved in industries such as transportation, telecommunications, and banking. The Commission screens all the discrimination complaints it receives. Many are settled through mediation or resolved through a dispute resolution process. In some instances, we refer complaints to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal for adjudication. The tribunal operates independently of the Commission. Canada was slow to outlaw sexual harassment in the workplace. In fact, sexual harassment was not recognized as a form of discrimination when Parliament passed the Canadian Human Rights Act in 1977. It wasn't until 6 years later, in 1983, that it was added as a form of sex discrimination, a definition that was confirmed by the Supreme Court in 1989. In other words, by the time the right to live and work free of sexual harassment was enshrined in law, women of my mother's generation were already retiring, having spent all their working lives without the benefit of these protections. What succeeding generations have found, sadly, is that while laws can protect our rights, they are not a shield. Sexual harassment persists in workplaces in Canada today. In the past 5 years, the Commission has received 332 complaints related to sexual harassment. More than 85% of these complaints were filed by women. When considering this number, it is important to note that the Commission usually only deals with the most intractable complaints. Many sexual harassment complaints from workplaces under federal jurisdiction never come to the Commission. They are handled through internal dispute resolution processes, internal grievance processes, or by the Public Service Labor Relations Board, which has jurisdiction to apply the Canadian Human Rights Act. So you will never get a complete picture of the problem from the number of complaints that come forward. We at the Commission believe, in fact, that sexual harassment in the workplace is underreported. Filing a complaint takes courage. In some organizations, there could be fears of stigma or retaliation. For many, complaining is a last resort. It's often easier just to quit or to remain silent and take it. And there are gaps in our understanding. We simply have no contemporary data on the prevalence of sexual harassment in Canada. In fact, only one major study has ever been conducted in Canada, and that was in 1994. The honourable members are no doubt aware of that study, entitled Work-Related Sexual Harassment, which analyzed survey data collected by Statistics Canada in 1993. The study found that close to 400,000 women, 6% of employed women, reported experiencing sexual harassment in the preceding 12 months. The same study found that 2.4 million women had experienced work-related sexual harassment in their working lives. We can't tell you what has changed in quantitative terms because we don't have the data. Clearly, that's a gap that needs to be filled. Our laws and redress mechanisms may be effective in providing recourse for those who choose and have the courage to seek it. However, their influence on human behavior or the internal culture of an organization is limited. In other words, they do not prevent sexual harassment from occurring or reoccurring, and so they do little to protect those who, for whatever reason, are unwilling to speak out. En vertu de la loi canadienne sur les droits.
The Canadian Human Rights Act and the Canada Labour Code place the onus on employers to ensure that employees can work free from sexual harassment.
An 8 federal jurisdiction workplace survey, 87% of employees who work under federal jurisdiction work for an organization with a harassment prevention program in place. 77% work for an organization with an appeal process against a decision related to harassment, and 76% work for an organization with a dispute or grievance review process. Plus les organisations sont petites, plus faible est la...
The smaller the organization, the less likely they are to have processes like these in place.
Sure that victims of sexual harassment have effective recourse. As I said earlier, by the time someone seeks recourse or remedy, the damage is already done. We must find better ways to address the issue before a person's dignity and self-respect suffer injury. D'après ce que la Commission a pu
Based on the Commission's experience, sexual harassment is more prevalent in hierarchical, male-dominated cultures.
In federally regulated workplaces requires a fundamental cultural shift within organizations. It requires a far-reaching commitment to respect for human rights, one that extends to all corners of an organization. The Commission believes that an equitable distribution of power within the workplace with an equitable representation of women in positions of responsibility fosters respect for human rights, inclusion, and diversity. Yet the proportion of women employed in senior management in Canada has remained relatively unchanged over the past 2 decades, according to the 2011 Conference Board of Canada report. Men have been 2 to 3 times more likely than women to hold senior management positions in both the private and public sectors. The latest employment equity figures show that in the federally regulated private sector, women held 42% of the jobs, but only 22% of senior management positions. In the federal public service, women held 55% of the jobs, but only 45% of senior management positions. Voilà une autre.
So that's another gap, another piece of the puzzle that needs to be addressed. The fact that close to 3 decades after sexual harassment was added to the Canadian Human Rights Act, we are sitting here to... Excuse me, I have to stop you here, Mr. Langtree. You have used up your time. It's very interesting. You get a chance to continue during question period. Mr. Gupta now from the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal.
Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, yes, you do have it. Would it be possible to summarize the presentation, or to provide the entire presentation to the committee, rather? The complete presentation? Yes, we do have copies here. So it's not too serious that we missed the last few paragraphs then. So we will be able to see the entire remarks. Mr. Gupta now.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honourable members, for the invitation to appear before your committee today as you begin your very important study of sexual harassment in federally regulated workplaces. I'm joined in the room by 2 colleagues from my office, Rochelle Boyer, Executive Director and Registrar at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and Greg Miller, Legal Counsel. Upon review of the questions that the committee seeks to address with its study, I thought I would begin by taking a few moments to discuss the mandate of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, as it will inform the scope of my presentation. I will then provide an overview of the legal principles that govern us when dealing with complaints of sexual harassment, and in closing, provide the committee with some statistical information that they may be of interest. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal is one of the 2 administrative agencies created by the Canadian Human Rights Act. You've already heard from my colleague from the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and it is important to note that there is significant interplay in the contributions each organization make towards the resolution of discrimination complaints under the CHRA. However, there are important distinctions to be drawn as well. While the Commission's mandate is multifaceted and includes a wide range of powers, duties, and functions, the statute has only assigned one main function to the tribunal, and that is the adjudication of complaints. In the context of the Canadian Human Rights Act, this adjudication process is referred to as an inquiry. So an individual who believes that sexual harassment has occurred within the meaning of the Human Rights Act can file a complaint to this effect with the Commission. If the Commission believes that an inquiry is warranted, it triggers the adjudicative process by making a request to the tribunal to inquire into the complaint. The inquiry mandated under the Canadian Human Rights Act has been described as quasi-judicial, which essentially means court-like. Hence, the tribunal has many of the powers and attributes of a court. It's empowered to find facts, to interpret and apply the law to the facts before it, and to award appropriate remedies. The tribunal's hearings have much the same attributes and structure as a formal trial before a court. The parties before the tribunal lead evidence, call and cross-examine witnesses, and make submissions on how the law should be applied to the facts. The parties who are entitled to appear before the tribunal include the individual who filed the complaint, the complainant, the person alleged to have engaged in the discriminatory practice, that would be the respondent, as well as the commission, the agency which initiated the inquiry process. As Parliament only assigned to the tribunal the role of adjudication, it cannot be involved in crafting policy. It has no regulatory role vis-a-vis employment practices in the federal workplace, nor does it have a public advocacy role. These roles are assigned to other bodies. A number of consequences flow from the court-like structure and focused mandate of the tribunal. Its members are required to maintain a high degree of independence from the executive branch of government, examples, Treasury Board, the Department of Justice, or HRSDC. Furthermore, to conserve one's impartiality, it is important for an adjudicator to adopt and retain a position of neutrality in respect of the issues which can and will be debated in the cases that he or she may be called upon to decide. In the context of the current briefing and the work of this committee, these principles prevent tribunal members, including myself, from issuing opinions on many of the matters that will be discussed in your study of sexual harassment in the federally regulated workplace, which is not to say that tribunal members will never make findings on any of these issues. On the contrary, they have done so frequently and will be called upon to do so again in the future. However, they must make these findings in the context of their adjudicative mandate, based on the submissions made by parties to a case, along with the evidence led and the applicable legal principle, which leads me to my next topic. What are the legal principles that the tribunal applies to complaints of sexual harassment? How do we define sexual harassment? The answer to these questions originate in our enabling legislation, the Canadian Human Rights Act. This legislation designates 11 prohibited grounds of discrimination, including discrimination based on sex. It also prescribes roughly 11 discriminatory practices, including the discriminatory practice set out at Section 14(1)(c), which provides that it is a discriminatory practice to harass an individual in matters related to employment on a prohibited ground. I would add that the eradication of sexual harassment was a matter of particular seriousness for Parliament, as evidenced by its being expressly mentioned in Section 14(2) of the Canadian Human Rights Act. The legal meaning of harassment generally, and sexual harassment in particular, for the purposes of Section 14, has been defined in the jurisprudence of the superior courts and has been developed by the decisions of the tribunal itself in individual cases. When a complaint of sexual harassment is referred to the tribunal for an inquiry, the tribunal member, after hearing all of the evidence and argument, generally has to decide whether the conduct at issue was unwelcome, sexual in nature, sufficiently persistent, repetitive, or severe to create a poisoned workplace, and in certain circumstances, whether the employee had notified the employer of the offensive conduct. If the tribunal determines that the impugned conduct fulfills these criteria, it can issue a number of remedial orders against the person found to have engaged in sexual harassment. In this last regard, it is worth noting that the respondent parties in sexual harassment complaints typically fall into two categories: the alleged harasser, generally the victim's co-worker or superior, who allegedly subjected the individual to the harassment, and or the employer, who has a legislative duty to exercise all due diligence to prevent harassment and mitigate or avoid its effects, failing which it is held responsible for the harassment. Where the harassment complaint has been substantiated, orders can be made either against the individual harasser, the employer, or both. Finally, in discussion, the tribunal's resolution of complaints would not be complete without mentioning that a significant portion of complaints referred to the tribunal are resolved by tribunal members mediating the complaints to facilitate settlements by parties. And tribunal members have been mediating human rights complaints for well over a decade. However, it is important to note that we have also adopted special measures to mitigate the effects of any power imbalance that may exist in negotiations between complainants and respondents, which are a particular concern in harassment cases. The final topic I would like to cover in my presentation is to provide you with some indication of the number of sexual harassment cases at the tribunal and the proportion that they make up of the tribunal's total caseload. Before I do so, there are a number of baseline considerations that should be taken into account. As has been alluded to, not all federal discrimination matters become complaints filed with the Commission. Of the complaints filed with the Commission, it is important to realize that only a small subset are referred to the tribunal for an inquiry. Moreover, of the total number of discrimination complaints referred to the tribunal for an inquiry, only a very small portion alleges harassment in employment on the ground of sex. Finally, not all complaints of harassment are found by the tribunal to be substantiated. Some are dismissed at the conclusion of the inquiry because the adjudicator has found that the evidence does not satisfy the legal requirements to prove harassment. That said, the following statistics may be of assistance to the committee. The Commission has referred 600 complaints to the tribunal since 2008, and those are complaints under all heads of discrimination. Of those 600 complaints, 36 complaints have been received since April 2008 that have alleged harassment in matters related to employment and on the prohibited ground of sex. That represents 6% of the total referrals. Perhaps of further interest to the committee as it pursues its study is the following breakdown by respondent groups. Of the 36 complaints I referred to involving harassment, 20 were against federally regulated companies and or individuals employed therein, i.e. non-governmental entities. That equals 3% of the total referrals to the tribunal. 9 of those complaints are against federal government and or individuals therein, which accounts for 1.5% of the total referrals to the tribunal. And finally, 7 are against First Nations and or individuals employed therein. In conclusion, I hope that this presentation has been assistance to the committee, and I'd be pleased to answer any additional information or answer any questions you might have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Je vous remercie beaucoup. Alors, on va commencer.
Thank you very much. We will now start our question period. We will start with Madam Roxanne James. Ms. Roxanne James.
And, thank you to all of our guests this afternoon. This is a very serious issue that we're embarking on. I'm very glad that the Parliamentary Secretary for the Status of Women has put this proposal forward. And I just hope that we can come out with some really good recommendations to improve the situation. I just want to touch base on a couple of things. I'm hearing these small numbers. You've said there was a very small percentage of the issues that have been forwarded to the tribunal that are actually related to sexual harassment in the workplace. And I believe, Mr. Langdry, if I had it correctly, you had indicated that, and please correct me if I am wrong here, you had indicated that very few complaints would ever come to you from the federal workplace because they're dealt with through the grievance or complaint process within the federal regulated workplace itself. Did you say that? I wasn't sure if I heard that. I just want to make sure I heard that correctly because I'm going to ask a second question after that. Thank you.
What I was saying is that the numbers, the 332 complaints that we have received since 2007 would represent only a small number of the complaints because you're quite right. Many would be dealt with through an internal grievance, or a person may not report it, or it may be referred to the Public Service Labor Relations Board, so it wouldn't come before us.
Okay. Our last witness was from the Treasury Board Secretariat, and they had indicated that within the federal workplace there are formal mechanisms to file a complaint. You can file a complaint, file a grievance, or actually file the complaint through the Canadian Human Rights Commission. Are you saying you've had none come from the federal regulated workplace?
No, we have had.
Okay.
What we're saying is that the numbers that we have would not be reflective of all of the complaints that are made. So a complainant may avail him or herself through the internal grievance redress process, or they may come to us, or it may be dealt with by the Public Service Labor Relations Board.
Okay. Do we know exactly the number, what the statistics are on those that may come? So, for example, in an organization regulated by the federal government, it hasn't been able to be resolved through, the grievance process or the complaint process that's put in through other means. Do you have the statistics or the actual number that might come your way as a result of it not being resolved, or the complainant not being fully satisfied that it's resolved?
And I should say that not all are, as a result of that, they may come directly to the commission without going through the other redress. So I can say that of all of the complaints that the commission receives, just to put it into context, all of the complaints that we receive, 3.7% are with respect to sexual harassment. Of the complaints that come to us against the federal public service, 3% of those complaints are with respect to sexual harassment.
Okay. You've touched base, I believe it was you that, Mr. Langdry, that were speaking to the fact that there needs to be a cultural change in the workplace, regardless of whether it's federal or elsewhere, and that predominantly when we run into problems with sexual harassment in the workplace, it's because it's a male, senior-dominated workforce. Is that what you correctly stated?
Yes.
Okay. Is it because do you feel it's because, I don't know necessarily whether you feel it's because it's a male-dominated workforce or whether you believe it's because it's a senior position. So I'm just maybe out of curiosity whether you feel it's a position of authority or whether it's a gender issue in this particular case.
I wouldn't necessarily be able to answer what the view is. The reason for saying it, though, is based upon the statistics that we have, our complaints statistics. When I say that 3.7% of all of our complaints are with respect to sexual harassment. And as I had said, in the federal public service, which would generally be regarded not as a male-dominated hierarchical organization, 3% of their complaints are. If we look, though, to the RCMP, of all of the complaints against the RCMP, 7% are with respect to sexual harassment, and the Canadian Forces, 8% of all of the complaints brought against the Canadian Forces are, as a result, based on sexual harassment. If we look in the transportation sector, 5% of the complaints against the transportation sector are sexual harassment, and I would add that almost half of those complaints come from the trucking industry.
Do you differentiate in terms of sexual harassment cases or complaints? Do you differentiate between, you've given me a number, 3.6%. Do you differentiate between how often it happens for someone who's not coming from a senior position? So, like normally I think, for myself, when I think of a typical case like this, it would be someone who is in a less senior position being the complainant and someone who's higher up in the organization being the one that's the dominant figure. Do you have many cases where it's even ground or someone in a lower position?
We receive cases from people in all levels of an organization.
Okay. Maybe I'll direct my next question to Mr. Gupta. You were talking about the legal definition of sexual harassment, and you indicated that it could include unwelcomed gestures or, I guess, comments, sexual in nature, going to severe in nature. What is the definition of unwelcomed? What does that mean? Is it? I just need this is curiosity, and to get clarification. Is unwelcomed someone making an unwelcome comment, or is it someone pursuing, a date, or what is it that would be considered something unwelcomed in terms of sexual harassment?
I think those two examples you give would be considered unwelcome. So anything where the individual who's the recipient of the action, the discussion, the talk, that it makes them feel unwelcome.
So, but
Je m'excuse, Madame James, vous avez écoulé votre temps.
Excuse me, your time has been used up. Now we will go to the official opposition. Ms. Asenia, you have 7 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm going to be sharing my time with my colleague, Ms. Day. First of all, I would like to thank our witnesses for their presentation and the excellent information they have provided. I have a question for Mr. Langtry, your colleagues. You talked about 7% relating to the RCMP. Are these from police members or civilian members of the RCMP?
Down between civilian and regular members of the RCMP, these because both do bring complaints. I certainly can provide that information, but it is both members. We, as I say, that we receive complaints.
Parfait, oui, j'aimerais ça. Vous avez mentionné.
Thank you. You also talked about the federal complaints sometimes being dealt with within the federal departments. So sometimes you may be dealing with very serious events and it is hard for you to know the exact extent of what is happening.
We wouldn't necessarily know that. The complaints that come before us, as I mentioned in my comments, they tend to be the ones where they use the word intractable because they tend to be the more serious ones. That's not to say all of them are then referred to the tribunal, of course. But having said that, there may be cases that are dealt with at the local level, if you will, within a department through their agency, and it may be that in the serious cases, as I had said, that a person chooses not even to come forward. Some may well leave the workforce or whatever. We have no way of tracking that kind of statistic because we can only deal with the complaints that come into the Commission.
Quelles ressources humaines et financières sont
What resources are being assigned to dealing with these complaints? Has there been changes in the finances available for dealing with these questions over the years?
Changes in finances other than the Commission did receive additional funding of $5.7 million at the time of change to our legislation in 2008 over 5 years, and the change being that complaints can now be brought by First Nations people in this country, both against the federal government and against First Nations government for matters done under pursuant to the Indian Act, which were previously precluded. So we did receive additional funding for that, which will sunset next fiscal year, midway through next fiscal year. But otherwise, we devote our resources, and we certainly look to trends on where the maximum, the highest number of complaints, and we're right now prioritizing systemic discrimination complaints to ensure that those areas that have the greatest impact on Canadians, but we're still required by legislation, of course, to receive individual complaints and deal with them in the same way as all other complaints.
Merci.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Langtry. Culture. One of the witnesses referring to culture as being part of the workplace, and we know that sexual harassment occurs in many forms. We have seen figures, we've heard figures this morning that seem to indicate the situation could be quite serious. And some of these people who are undergoing harassment will take their complaints all the way up to the Commission. So I have a question about procedure, because I was quite surprised. Now, the procedures for dealing with grievances, and I think that the complainant should be referred to the instances which are most suited to dealing with this complaint. So the policy seems to be that complaints, the fewest number of complaints are being dealt with. Do you feel that some of these complaints are being eliminated or diverted?
say that they are being diverted because if a respondent, if the employer says they want us to refer it to the alternate dispute process that they have, it is within our jurisdiction under our act to refer it out. However, it is open to the complainant to raise the reasons why he or she should not be required to go through that other process, and we can choose then to deal with it ourselves in those appropriate circumstances. So it's not always being diverted out. They're not always required to go to another process. They can come to us. It is our view, and obviously the view of Parliament in providing for that the Canadian Human Rights Commission does not have the monopoly on human rights and dealing with discrimination, that other tribunals and other sources have the ability to deal and apply the Canadian Human Rights Act.
Est-ce que votre organisme joue un rôle?
Do you play a preventative role with regard to sexual harassment?
We do have a preventive role. Certainly that's one of the mandates, and we have a branch devoted to that. Ms. Maillet is from our Knowledge Center, which develops policies and knowledge-based researches, and our prevention discrimination branch as well. And we have a tool, a recent one, the Human Rights Maturity Model, which is a tool to assist employers developing a culture of human rights in the workplace.
Merci.
Thank you. So, Ms. Embler, you have 7 minutes.
For being here today to discuss this issue with us. I'd like to just wrap up Ms. James' questions, if I might. Mr. Gupta, I think what she was trying to get at was the definition of sexual harassment, and in particular, at what point does it reach the stage where you would call it harassment? So in an example, if someone in a workplace, if was being asked out on a date or for a drink after work, and that was an unwanted question or request, and the person asked the next day again and the next day, is there a number of times after which it's considered harassment, or is it more than just perception by the person, the unwelcomed advances? Is it just about perception? At what point does it become defined as harassment by the Human Rights Tribunal?
No, it's the courts have said there's a number of factors that the decision maker must look at in terms of I think specifically asked about whether it's unwelcome, for example. I'll read you. It says the test for sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature that is detrimental to the work environment. To determine whether that conduct is unwelcome, the tribunal will look at the complainant's reaction at the time the incident occurred and assess whether he or she expressly or by her behavior demonstrated that the conduct was unwelcome. So that's one factor that the tribunal would have to consider. The other factors would be the repetitiousness of it and how severe are the actions or the comments that are made. So there's a whole number of factors that a tribunal in an individual case would have to consider if that scenario met the test of harassment.
So it's not just about persistence, it's about the effect in the workplace, the effect on people around them, the ability to do one's job without
a feeling of
retribution.
Correct.
Okay, fair
That's
enough.
right.
Thank you. I was wondering how often tribunal complaints are referred to a panel. My understanding is that if the case is complex enough, that the chairperson will assign it to a panel to conduct an inquiry. Is that true? And at what point is a case sufficiently complex enough to warrant a panel referral?
So in terms of the number of cases that the tribunal has appointed a panel, essentially, which would be a panel of 3 members, our legislation provides for a inquiry to be overseen by either a panel of 1 or a panel of 3. I presume you're asking about a panel of 3.
I think so, yes.
I don't have the data in terms of how many cases have been referred to a panel.
Half, lot, many, most, not
Not
hardly
many.
any? Not many.
Not many.
Okay.
Certainly in the early 2000s and late 1990s, there were a few cases under pay equity.
Okay. So they have to be, I would think, very complicated.
There's a number of factors: complication, number of witnesses, the complexity of the issues, the novelty. Are these new legal issues that need to be considered? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands of pages of documents? And is this of significant national importance, for example? All these considerations, as well as resource implications of essentially taking 3 of our members off of assignment to 60 cases that they might all share
to hear this,
to hear something like that.
And how, I'm wondering if, and because you obviously keep statistics, and I'm very pleased to get some idea of numbers, and I thank you for that. How often are the employers held liable for the action of their employees, and specifically asked to compensate the victim? I know that there are $20,000 limits for pain and suffering, another $20,000 if the harassment was deemed to be willful. How often does that happen? How often do we charge the employer? Do we convict the employer and make that person pay damages?
Well, each individual adjudicator, first of all, we don't actually collect statistics at the tribunal generally. Okay. We prepared some numbers today for the committee to assist them, and certainly if there are some other specific data sets you would like us to collect, I think we can do so. Okay. In terms of the remedial orders that the tribunal can issue, you are correct. Where a respondent, be it an individual, a government department, or a corporation, has been found to have discriminated against an individual or sexually harassed an individual, the person or the organization can be ordered to implement sexual harassment training and sensitization within the workplace. The employer, in consultation with the commission, the tribunal can require that the respondent draft or revise its sexual harassment policy. That's something that the commission has a lot of expertise in doing, and that can include internal complaint and investigation procedures.
So there are many ways that of redress for including payment, monetary payments.
Most certainly there are. Most certainly.
You would know off the top of your head how often one is used versus a different kind of.
No, I wouldn't know that.
That's okay. No problem. Thank you. In terms of those statistics on harassment, have you noticed or observed a frequency, the frequency of sexual harassment cases in particular on the rise? Just wondering if there's a trend, and if so, in what direction that trend might be heading.
You know, it's hard for me to say that. I think I had mentioned that we've had 36 cases of harassment referred to us since 2008. And it's pretty consistent over that period. So I can't say that we've seen a trend.
Noticed a trend one way or the other?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm wondering if how often, if ever, you see cases of complaints by men where the harasser is a woman.
I can't say I've seen any personally. Now, I wouldn't know the facts of every single one of our cases at the tribunal as acting chair.
Maybe should I be asking
perhaps,
you, Mr. Rankin? Sorry, I'm not sure who I should ask.
Votre temps est malheureusement écoulé.
Unfortunately, your time is up. Thank you. Now we will recognize Ms. Scrow. You have 7 minutes.
I think we're all interested in very much similar information when it comes to the numbers, because it really says a lot. Mr. Gupta, can you provide for us, from a tribunal's perspective or the Commission's perspective, Mr. Langdry, the breakdown of the numbers of, you were pretty specific here on cases, but how many of them resulted in I'm not saying a victory is the word, but successful treatment for the complainant, how many of them were found unsubstantiated? I think it would be helpful for us, our committee, as we go forward, if you could supply us with that kind of a breakdown of those kinds of numbers for further discussion.
Maybe I'll start with at least what's happened at the tribunal at the adjudication and turn it over to my colleague here.
Briefly, please.
Yes, very brief. 36 cases I mentioned involving harassment since 2008, or 36 complaints, sorry. In 2 cases, awards were rendered, which I would harassment. 3 have had a hearing and are awaiting a decision by the adjudicator. 16 were settled through mediation, and the 13 remaining are currently in the inquiry process, meaning they're leading towards a hearing or mediation.
Maybe you could supply the committee with your notes, Mr. Gupta, so we have those, if you have them down, so that we would all have them for further reference.
Of course.
Mr. Langtree?
Yes, I think from a time point of view, I can certainly provide the information. I'm wondering whether it might be helpful to provide that after the fact, and I can also answer the question on the percentage of complaints that have been brought by men alleging female perpetrator and that kind of information.
It would be very helpful for all of us as we go forward.
Both the information. We do have the breakdown of cases and how they have been handled and resolved.
The 1993 study that was done on work-related sexual harassment, I mean, has quite alarming numbers when it's 6% of the 400,000 women who had reported experiencing sexual harassment. The same study pointed out that 2.4 million women had experienced workplace sexual harassment in their working lives. Those were the ones that had responded to the survey. I suspect that there are many, many more, if asked today on that larger issue, who simply leaves a place of employment. Filing a complaint with the Human Rights Commission is, as far as I'm concerned, the avenue of last resort. Many that I have talked to, women who often raise these issues, just say they just weren't going to put themselves through it. The chances of success, it's the employee against the employer. They're feeling intimidated, and again, some of that relates back to the RCMP issues and clearly the frustrations that many of the female officers had. And you said there were 7% of your complaints were from the RCMP and 8% from the Armed Forces. Now, the Armed Forces has made some fairly significant changes, I'm told, anyway, at least on paper. Time will tell whether they're effective or not. But why is it it's both of those are male-dominated and both in an area that requires, military attitudes, I guess you could put it there. Why is it that both of those are the 2 highest that you're getting the complaints from? Any particular point there?
Not necessarily, other than the conclusion that we had drawn is it is the hierarchical male-dominated organizations where we see the greatest number of the proportionate number of complaints of sexual harassment. And certainly in both cases we will sometimes receive the complaints on the basis that concern has been expressed over the internal grievance process because of the chain of command. That doesn't mean to say we always take the case, but we do receive a number of those where complaint or concern is expressed about because of the chain of command as to whether it's independent and impartial grievance process and whether ultimately there is a neutral third party who can consider the complaint.
So you don't necessarily just accept them. You review them and then can suggest that they seek adjudication somewhere else because of the chain of command issue?
Yes, we can. We have the discretion under our legislation to refer it out Our act, the way Section 41 reads, is we are required to accept the complaint unless, and the first unless is if there is a redress mechanism, an alternate mechanism, grievance process that can handle the complaint. So it's a discretionary. We don't have to send it out to the other. And so where a complainant says, here are the reasons why I don't want to be sent out, then we can take the case and we can deal with it.
Do you know if the Public Service has ever done a survey, or have you ever done a survey of the people who have left the Public Service and why?
I know we have never done it, and I'm not aware if the Public Service has.
Well, it may be time that that kind of a survey was done to find out exactly how many are leaving because of intimidation, sexual harassment, or harassment in general. Many people just leave because it's not worth the battle and it's not worth the embarrassment and the stigma, as you so clearly point out as we move forward on a lot of this. The internal monitoring of some of these cases that I was referring to earlier, we're getting the numbers so that we can get a better handle on just how large the number is. Specifically to the issue of the sexual harassment and how those issues were resolved. I'd be very interested to know the success rate. I think it would be encouraging for many people out there if they knew that they had a real good chance of a tribunal really going to bat for them. They probably would more, and you clearly probably have lots of work on your plate now. How long does it generally take from the time a complaint is brought to you to that time that it's resolved?
Madame Scrow, votre temps est malheureusement...
Unfortunately, your time is up, Ms. Scrow.
Or
our average age of cases is 1 year.
Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. I just have to consult the committee. We have the notes from Mr. Gupta's speech, and he has said that we may distribute them, but I would need unanimous consent from the committee to do so because the notes are in English only. Is that all right? I refuse. Unfortunately, we cannot distribute the notes. Yes, we will have them translated, and then you will get them at a later date once they've been translated. Thank you. Now, continuing with our questions, Ms. Zaitman.
Your presentations today. I want to first get clarification. You are in charge of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, which is governed by the rules from Treasury Board. It is a federal government arm, is it not?
We are independent of government because, of course, we receive complaints against the federal government, including complaints against Treasury Board.
But when you hire an employee, the values and ethics of the federal government of Canada apply to your employees,
that is correct.
Right?
Yes.
You are governed, and you, in fact, participate across Canada with federal councils. Certainly, you're in Ottawa. You probably don't know what those are, but
I live in Winnipeg.
Exactly. So I knew you were a good guy. I think that's a very important point, that your employees are governed the same way as every federal government employee. We had a little bit of lack of clarity at the start of this meeting about who actually governs the policies and procedures regarding this very, very important issue, and it is Treasury Board, and you must comply. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So do your employees get training, as the gentleman who came before from Treasury Board indicated all federal government employees receive, in terms of what the expectations are for the respectful workplace, how we expect people to respect differences, et cetera, et cetera?
We do almost on a continuous basis from time to time, provide training to employees. It can be on specific areas, general areas. We as well, on new employees, have a mentorship so that all new employees are mentored one-on-one. And, of course, all employees, indeed, as you say, are covered by all of those policies, the values and ethics. They all sign, and I can say that in the last survey that was done, to digress just for a moment, the public service survey, we were very, very pleased by the results of that. I mean, obviously, there's always room for improvement, but we fared better than the average of the public service considerably in most of the categories. As well, we're responsible for the Employment Equity Act in terms of the auditing of
but
employment
you're
equity.
responsible for the Employment Equity Act of the federal government of
That's
Canada,
correct,
right?
yes.
So that's really good that you are governed by Treasury Board, because from what I understand and from what we heard this morning, this is responsible policy, this is respectful policy, and the fact that all federal government agencies are governed by it is good. You referred in your comments just now to the public service survey, and there's been a lot of discussion about surveys, and people have randomly said, we need another survey, we need another survey. Could we get in, with the other additional information from you? You mentioned that you performed well under the last public service survey. Those are very expensive to conduct. They're also very important to do, right, and we value that analysis. So if that could become an integral part of your testimony at this, because the fact that you are remarking on your performance is wonderful, but I understand the public service itself also demonstrated some improvement generally, and if not, we should see those numbers.
Yes, and certainly we can provide the results of ours,
That'd
which also has then the benchmarks, obviously, of the whole public service.
Now, the leadership piece, we heard about what is being done for the employee, and what, there's no employee in the federal government of Canada who is unaware of the values and ethics. I mean, you're indicating that they're required to sign something. It's very clear that they're a part of this philosophy. So are we doing the same thing for, malheureusement, seulement 30 secondes?
There's 30 seconds maximum. Thank you.
How do we, the walking the talk, the leadership piece, and maybe you're going to have to put this in your subsequent piece as well, because that matters. How people, and the other thing, I want to thank our colleague, the Honourable Judy Scroll, for her question, and my colleague, Stella Ambler, who
Madame Bateman, si vous voulez qu'il réponde à la question.
You should give the witness a chance to answer.
The male, female, because we're hearing more and more that males are also subjected to harassment. So thank you for giving us those statistiques. Je vous remercie.
Very quickly, very, because the time is end.
I will take up the offer to provide, when I send the rest of the information, to answer that question.
OK. Alors, c'est ce qui met fin à notre...
Well, this ends our meeting today. I would like to thank you for having come to appear before us today. We will not be sitting Thursday. Our next meeting will be October 23rd, a Wednesday. So with that, I wish you a good day.